the sooner you understand emotional intelligence and the sooner that you can get better at it, it's going to change every relationship in your life.
Something to keep you cool. Better look out now, though. Dave's got something for you. Tell you what it is.
Today's podcast is one that is very, very close to me. And pardon me if I may show some emotion through this, because this was probably one of my greatest learning experiences in my life, to be candid with you. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence and really how to increase your emotional intelligence and what it is. When I was growing up, my dad would yell at me, and it was kind of normal back then, right? I mean, that was the way of life. He would lose his temper. He would yell at me and correct me, get me back on track. And it was kind of viewed back then as that was their responsibility, to yell at us for bad decisions or mistakes, to correct you, to get you back on track. And it was modeled for me that dads yelling at their kids was how it was supposed to be. That's how it was supposed to be. And understand that I'm not blaming my dad, because it was modeled for him as well. Back then, that was how it was done, at home and at work. And candidly, it was no different for a lot of my friends back then. But there was a combination of fear and respect for the position of father or dad, and I had a combination of fear and respect for my father. Now, I'm certainly not blaming my dad, because that's how it was modeled. And if you look at the product of my father's approach to upbringing, he helped shape me, my 3 brothers, and my 2 sisters, who, even at this point in our lives, are still very close. And my brothers and sisters are great people. So I am not condemning my father's approach. That's how emotional intelligence was modeled for me back then. And that's what he knew. That was the best. He did the best he could, because that's what was modeled for him. And so growing up, I had a very short fuse and lost my temper pretty quickly. I was never violent or anything, but, I would yell and pound my fist on the table. That's all I knew. Until one day, I'll never forget this day either. One day I was coaching my 8-year-old son in basketball at the YMCA, and he lost his temper, and he threw the basketball at another player. And I quickly asked myself, where did he learn that? What is that all about? And it hit me like a freight train. I mean, he learned it from me. I learned it from my dad. So this had become a generational characteristic. And I was modeling it for him. And it was at that moment that I knew something had to change. It was my wake-up call. Because I don't want to be remembered that way. And I certainly do not want to raise my son that way. So soon thereafter, I sought out tools and resources to figure out how I can more effectively manage my temper. Because with my behavioral style, my 90 on my D and my DISC style, my behavioral style, anger is the emotion that goes with your dominance factor. And having a 90, I had anger in me. I had a very short fuse. And so I sought out resources. I sought out ways to learn about how I could better manage this. Because again, that really impacted me when I saw that I was transferring this generational trait onto my son, and I wanted to stop it at my generation. I wanted to end it. And so I took an emotional intelligence assessment, and I discovered that I was an emotional idiot, man. I had little self-awareness and no regulation of my emotions. In fact, my emotions controlled me. I did not control my emotions. And it was negatively impacting every relationship in my life, at work and at home. Increasing my emotional intelligence became my singular leadership development priority. I read several books on it and eventually was trained and certified in emotional intelligence. And the irony is that I'm now training other leaders on emotional intelligence. You know, they say often the best coach and teacher are those who overcame the same issue. So when I talk to a leader about developing their emotional intelligence, growing in that area, I went through the same process. So I understand where they're at. I understand where they're, you know, what position they're in. And I tell you this story not for sympathy, because I had a really, really good upbringing, and we have a very close family, and my dad did a great job, but it was modeled for me that losing your temper was just part of being a dad. And but I wanted to be a better leader at work and at home, and I had to own my behavior. I had to understand, own, and leverage my behavior, as we talk about. And I told you my story because emotional intelligence can be a game changer in your life as well. It was for me. I mean, the growth I've had in this area has been incredible. So one of the things about emotional intelligence is that I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know it existed. I just thought that you had a temper, and that was just, some people had worse tempers than others. But I didn't understand that there was a whole behavioral science behind it. I knew nothing about it. And so with that being said, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the 5 dimensions of emotional intelligence, and then how you can determine your level of emotional intelligence, and then most importantly, how can you increase your emotional intelligence and be the leader that you want to be at work and at home. Now, there are 5 dimensions to emotional intelligence. The first 3 dimensions are really how you manage emotions with self. They're called self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. And the other 2 dimensions of emotional intelligence are social awareness and social regulation. So let's first talk about the 3 dimensions of emotions of self. And the first one is self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your moods and emotions, as well as their effects on others. It's really about being in touch with where you're at in that specific moment, or the ability you have to recognize when your emotions are what we call red, and how do you move those emotions to clear. It's really about being aware of your emotions before you take actions and make decisions. Now, one of the first steps that I took in increasing my self-awareness was really understanding what my triggers were. What are the things that just get me ticked off, that frustrate me, that make me happy? Because there are emotions that are positive, right? And so I defined my emotional intelligence, my triggers of my emotional intelligence. I call those triggers kind of like the tripwire, right? You're walking, and you actually, when you have self-awareness, you see the tripwire. When you do not have self-awareness, you just walk right through that tripwire. And so one of my emotional intelligence triggers, especially negative triggers, is when somebody uses always or never in a sentence, because that's not likely true. Another trigger for me is when you call customer service of a company and the person that you're dealing with doesn't know what they're doing. So it sounds kind of bad, but incompetence, people not knowing what they're doing when you call them for that specific reason, that's a trigger. Oh, and by the way, another trigger of mine is traffic. That gets me going. And so one of the other breakthroughs besides seeing emotional intelligence, or the lack of it, in my son, another trigger for me to really change, to really grow in this area is that when there was an issue in a relationship that I had, I would get emotional. I would have a very, emotional response. I should say an emotional reaction. And my response to that issue with that individual now became the issue. So let's say that I had a disagreement with my wife and I got emotional. Because of my emotion, my response, which again wasn't good, right? My response now became the issue. And all we then would talk about moving forward was that issue, my response. We never got back to the original issue as to why I became emotional to begin with. And that just was a frustration to me, that we never got back to the original issue and solve it. And it was like a light bulb turned on that, man, when an issue does happen in my life, and we all have them on a daily basis, maybe a weekly basis, a monthly basis, but when they happen, how do you respond to that? And then how do you work through it and resolve it by having level emotions? And so every time I'd have an issue, my response became the issue, and then I just had these issues building up because we never got back to solving the original issue. And that really was another factor that just drove me to want to become much more intelligent around my emotions. And so I just got tired of never getting back to the real issue. And that was another breakthrough for me in my journey of emotional intelligence. So the first dimension of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And it's really just understanding where you're at, where your temperature is in the moment, and having really a knowledge and awareness of, hey, I'm starting to get warm, I'm starting to get frustrated, I'm starting to get angry, and being aware of that. And that's something you really have to work on. You have to be conscious of where you're at in a given day. Do you take your temperature, in the morning, in the afternoon? I'm consistently checking my emotions during the day because I know that if I don't check them, they're going to get the best of me. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension is self-regulation. And this is really once you get emotional, this is the ability to control or redirect your impulses and moods and the propensity to suspend judgment and think before acting. So that's the definition, but fundamentally, this is about your ability to control your emotions and control your actions and decisions once you become emotional. And candidly, this is, in my 20 years of experience working with leaders and fathers and mothers and just all roles in life, just people, this is typically the toughest dimension of emotional intelligence to master. And it is for me, and still is for me. So basically the way self-regulation works is that, and this goes back to the good old days when you had the fight or flight instincts built into you, but fundamentally what happens is that you have a gland in your neck called the amygdala. And your amygdala uses your senses, your eyesight, your ears, your smell, to sense danger. And the amygdala really it's your emotional storehouse. It's where all your passions are, where your emotions are. And it really provides you the instincts to quickly react to a life or death situation. So let's say you're walking across the street, you're about to walk across the street, and out of the corner of your eye, your amygdala senses danger. It senses a car is coming. And that quick instinct that you step back on the curb, if you had to use your brain there, you would have hesitated, you had to think, well, you might have got hit by the car by then. But your amygdala provides you this instant response. It's your instincts. Your brain is shut off and your amygdala takes over because it's sensing danger. It's sensing risk to you. And so it's the amygdala is your friend in that it provides you instincts to save your life, but your amygdala is also your foe in that once you are safe, once you are not in harm's way, now you have to turn the amygdala off and turn your brain back on and make thoughtful responses, take thoughtful actions, make thoughtful decisions, right? So your amygdala experiences danger, shuts your brain off, provides you instincts to save yourself in that moment. But then once you realize that you are safe, now it's a matter of turning that amygdala off consciously and turning your brain back on. So when my emotions get going, I can see the trigger wire. I have the awareness now to feel it. But I'll see that trigger wire, I'll see that wire, and to be honest with you, a lot of times I just might plow right through it, right? I recognize when I'm getting frustrated or angry, even with that self-awareness, sometimes I cannot regulate those emotions. And that's when other people feel it. So I will react with anger or say something that I might later regret. And one of the really interesting facets of using multiple sciences in talent development and talent selection is that your emotional intelligence manifests itself through your behavioral style. So I have a high dominance and influencing factor, so I have a high D&I in my behavioral style. And when I lose my emotions, it's likely to come out. I'm a very outbound, very verbal, very external leader in person. And so my lack of emotional intelligence manifests itself through my style by it used to be anyway. It used to come out. I used to have those actions. I used to make those unthoughtful response or reactions. If you have a high S or C and more of an introverted style or more of a thoughtful style, it's likely when you lose your emotional intelligence that it's not going to come out, but you'll still think it. You'll still judge others. So one of the interesting facets about behavioral science is your lack of emotional intelligence will show itself, will manifest itself through your behavioral style. So just understand that you will show or not show emotional intelligence based on your behavioral style. And so someone that's very extroverted you'll hear it, they'll say something, they'll do something that maybe is inappropriate, but a high S or a high C or a more introverted style will think it. And you could argue that both are equally bad in that moment. Instead of an emotional reaction with high self-regulation, you have a thoughtful response, which is now my objective in any situation when I get emotional. I want it to be not an emotional reaction. I want it to be a thoughtful response. So what are some of the techniques that I use to get me from cloudy, emotionally cloudy to clear? How do I move myself from being emotional to being very level? The first thing I do in the moment is I say to myself, EQ, EQ, EQ. I repeat it to myself in the head, calm, stay level, lead through this situation, have a thoughtful response. There is a technique that I use, and I coach a lot of leaders on this. It's called the STAR technique, STARR. The S in STAR, is, in my opinion, the most important one. It's the first one, and the S stands for stop. When you get emotional, just stop. And then the T stands for think. Think about your options. First, I need to stop, and that is the toughest one for self-regulation, because if you don't have self-regulation, you're not going to stop. So the first thing that I tell myself is stop in the moment. Do not have an initial reaction. Do not have an emotional reaction to the situation. So stop. Then think about what my options are in this situation. Is the best option for me to check out of this conversation, maybe to come back to it at a later date? Is the best option for me to continue on and have the conversation? What are my options? So S stands for stop, T stands for think, and A stands for assess. Assess your options. Choose the right option in the moment, the one that's going to allow you to provide the most thoughtful response to the situation. And the first R in STAR stands for your response, right? It's to have a thoughtful response, not an emotional reaction. And then the last R in STAR, STARR, is to review. How did I handle that situation? How can I do it better next time? So S stands for stop, T stands for think, A stands for assess. The first R stands for response, and then the last R stands for review. And this is a technique that now becomes natural for me as I go through it. It just automatically happens. And one of the other ways that I control my emotional intelligence is by working out. I work out at the end of the day so that I can burn off my aggression, I can burn off my emotions, and that really allows me to work through some of the things that have gone on during the day that I potentially could be emotional about, and just work through them, think through them, let them go. Another technique that I'll use is I have three accountability partners that I can call at any moment and vent, have a conversation, and our conversation goes nowhere. It's part of the accountability partner process is confidentiality. So they are critical in allowing me to talk through what I'm emotional about, and then maybe encouraging me, maybe giving me some advice, or maybe just listening. In the 20 years of training and coaching emotional intelligence, occasionally I will not see the trigger coming and I will react. As much as I train and coach on emotional intelligence and I talk to people about it every day, I will make mistakes still. And in fact, it even happened 2 weeks ago. And again, I want to apologize to my wife again for my reaction that I had, and just know that I want to keep getting better at emotional intelligence. The tripwire was right there, and I just plowed right through it and had an emotional reaction to the situation, and it was not how I wanted to handle it, not only in that moment, but moving forward. The third factor of emotional intelligence is motivation, and that's a passion to work for reasons that go beyond the external motivators of life. So it's your intrinsic motivation, and it's your motivation level to adjust your actions and behavior based on your self-awareness and your regulation. Are you motivated? Do you have the motivation to be thoughtful about your response? Are you motivated to handle your motivations or your emotions more effectively? Those with lower motivation will have lower drive to adjust their emotions based on the situation, to make decisions and take action. So motivation is the motivation to enhance and improve how you handle your emotions. All right, the fourth factor is the focus on others, your emotions towards other people. Social awareness is your ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and how your words and actions affect others. So this is the ability to assess if the other person is in a high emotional state or if they're level. Candidly and simply put, it's about the ability to read the room. Where is this other person at emotionally? And it's your ability to understand how your actions and behaviors and your emotions are going to impact them based on where they're at. One life rule that I have here for social awareness is really, and really understanding where people are at is really just kind of asking them, right? How you doing today? Where are you at? How you feeling? And really just being thoughtful about having that understanding before we even get into our meeting or get into what we're going to do. One of the greatest learnings of my life was a statement that I came up with as I was going through my emotional intelligence journey, and that was, making statements creates judgment. Asking questions creates opportunity. I mean, think about that. When you want to respond to somebody, making a statement will create judgment, especially if they're emotionally not level at this point, if they're emotional. But asking a question creates opportunity for more conversation, for dialogue, to work through the emotional situation. So one of the rules of life that I live by, especially when it comes to my emotional intelligence, and I would encourage you as well, is making statements creates judgment. Asking questions creates opportunities. Think about that, use that, live that. And so that's one of the things I'll tell you in 2018 in my leadership development. I wanted to build deeper relationships. I know a ton of people based on what I do, and so I know thousands of people, but I wanted to build a couple very close relationships, and having higher social awareness, and the fifth factor, social regulation, having higher emotions towards others, was a way for me to build those deeper relationships. And in fact, I've accomplished that and keep working on that, because I've built a couple very deep relationships, which I needed and which I wanted. And that all started by having better emotional intelligence towards others. The last factor of emotional intelligence, and again, this one is towards others, and that's social regulation. It's your ability to influence the emotional clarity of others. And a proficiency in managing relationships and building networks. It's your ability to help others move from emotionally cloudy to clear. And one of the easiest ways to help you understand this dimension of emotional intelligence is to tell you this story of my wife and I were actually flying together to a speaking engagement, and we were on an airplane. We were about 15 minutes out of Detroit, and all of a sudden the cabin starts filling with smoke, and the whole place got emotional. I mean, it was a very emotional situation. I mean, we just got up in the air, we got wings full of gas, and here there's smoke billowing into the cabin. I held my wife's hand, and there was an elderly woman to my right, and I held her hand, and I just EQ. And I was able, through managing my emotions, my self-regulation, I was able to then help my wife and the woman next to me stay calm, stay rational, and regulate their emotions. And so, just to finish the story, because you're wondering, what happened? We quickly came out of the sky. These flight attendants were carrying flashlights and fire extinguishers, and they're like, we're going to turn around. And when your airplane turns around, it wasn't turning around. So we came down quickly, and we could see a runway in the distant future, or we could see a runway ahead of us. And there were fire trucks and ambulance and all types of lights flashing. And as we landed, they circled our plane. At the end of the day, the captain came out about an hour later after sitting there, which was a very emotional time, and just said that we blew an oil gasket in our engine, and that we'll be fine. But When you think that you're going to die, you get emotional. But if you can regulate your emotions, you increase your chance of getting through that situation, and also help others around you. And that's what happened that day. And I was glad I had emotional intelligence that day, to be candid with you. So those are the 5 dimensions of emotional intelligence. They're self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. And those are emotions of self. And then social awareness and social regulations are your ability to manage and understand the emotions of others. So how can you measure your emotional intelligence? There's several ways to do this. Ask yourself, how well are you doing on each of the 5 dimensions? Now, one of the things I did was just get some books on it. Daniel Goleman is the guru and the doctor of emotional intelligence, so read his books. That's what I did. I just studied and read about the 5 factors of emotional intelligence and just got more knowledge on it. I mean, you can't manage and regulate something that you don't know or don't understand. So my first step was, I got to understand this so that I can better manage it. And I didn't really understand emotional intelligence until I was the age of 35. But that does not have to be that way for you. And regardless of your age, the sooner you understand emotional intelligence and the sooner that you can get better at it, it's going to change every relationship in your life. And really just create a plan around and improve the dimensions where you have the greatest growth opportunity. Self-regulation was clearly my greatest growth opportunity, and then my emotions towards others was my second opportunity. Another way that you can measure your emotional intelligence is take a EQ assessment. We use an emotional intelligence assessment that has an incredible report to it. It provides pages and pages of content about you and your emotions. As a matter of fact, there's one whole page on each factor of emotional intelligence that gives you 10 to 15 suggestions on how to improve that specific dimension. I think it's the best report in the industry. And the report that comes with your assessment has one page, again, on the suggestions to improve in each area. And for less than $100, you can really understand your emotions and become a lot better at it. And so I would encourage you to understand your emotional intelligence from a behavioral science aspect. And then another way that you can really enhance your emotional intelligence is to complete training on emotional intelligence. Here at Stop the Vanilla and STV Advisors, we offer a very cost-effective online training program that you can complete at your own pace. It has, I think, 14 to 15 modules in it. You can watch them at your own pace, and you can go back and watch them again if you want. I mean, so for a couple $100, you can take an EQ assessment, you can complete the online training, and you can increase your emotional intelligence and improve every relationship in your life. If you have interest in learning more about emotional intelligence, taking an assessment, taking the online training, email us at info@stopthevanilla.com. So I want to thank you for letting me share my story on how EQ has changed every relationship in my life. I was an emotional idiot young in my life. I lost my temper a lot. I rarely lose my temper now. Again, every once in a while it gets the best of me, and that's something I got to keep working on, and will keep working on. But I was blessed to discover emotional intelligence while my kids were still young. So I was able to model emotional intelligence for them before they left our home to build their own life. And I am so blessed and happy to tell you that my son, and I'm so proud of him, has high emotional intelligence, and I'm so thankful for that. Understanding emotional intelligence changed my life, and it can change your life too. Team members and family members want to follow a leader that can not only manage their emotions, but can help others do it as well. And so I want to encourage you to understand your emotions, become more effective at managing your emotions, and become a better leader at work and at home, because it will change your life, and I can speak to you directly about that. So thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time on the Stop the Vanilla podcast, where we help you achieve what you want in your business, your career, and your life with the right plan, implemented with the right talent.
I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by. On my mind, I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by.